Business is simple. It's just not easy. We focus on 3 things to help you run and grow your business more easily: talent, sales, and how to scale. This is the Talent, Sales, and Scale Show. Okay, so we are now live and we're on podcast. I didn't realize as soon as you click that live button, you were going. So new hires are working well. So one thing for those of you that maybe have not used live, definitely make sure that you have it on mute and on a different screen because there's a little bit of a delay. So if you're watching it, it's going to screw you up. So that's going live in the background. So there's your 2 cents on using YouTube Live for today. But today we have Jordana Zeldin coming with us on a journey, and she's from Spring, spelled incorrectly, but with 2 I's, Spriing Training. Is that right? Spring, 2 I's in Spring, right? Yeah. So in Spriing Training, and we were bantering back and forth. And we thought, you know what, why don't we talk about objection handling? So that's going to be the topic of today, is how in the world do we handle objections? So whenever you were thinking through this, Jordana, what came to mind? I mean, what are maybe some things that you want to discuss, and we'll create a bit of an agenda here. What are some of the things that you want to discuss on objection handling as you were prepping for this? You know, what came to mind?
Yeah, I feel like in some ways, objection handling, the skill involved in objection handling can be broken up into 2 parts. One is mindset. How
I had mindset too.
Yeah, and then the other is actually what you do, right? So that's kind of how I've been thinking about it.
Okay, so you broke it up into mindset and tactics.
Mindset, exactly, and tactics. Yes.
Okay, so I bridged mine out a little bit more. So I had mindset.
Yeah.
And you probably had emotions under mindset, but that emotional point of view.
Yeah.
And then I also had broken into practice, because whenever I was flying airplanes, we'd have flight simulators, right? And we used to call it sims of death. You go in, you know, I had a 4-engine airplane and 3 engines would go out. I'm passing over the Atlantic in a hurricane and the electric completely fails, right? Things that are the sims of death. You put yourself into situations like that whenever you're flying. But we see these every day. I mean, how often do you get, well, you know, you're too much. Oh, son of a gun. How do I handle that? Like, it's the first time we ever ran into it. So I put into practice as well as tactics. So I have mindset, emotions, practice, and tactics.
Okay, that works for me. Yeah, it's good.
So all right, whenever let's hit on mindset first, because as I was thinking through this, how did you break up the mindset idea?
Well, there are a few, and my thinking is always evolving on this, but there are a few things that I was thinking. The first is that I think sellers often try to do everything that they can to avoid objections.
Ah, that's a great one.
And I actually think we need to do the opposite and go towards them, proactively seek them out, because just because an objection isn't shared verbally doesn't mean it isn't there.
Yeah. So yeah. I've heard people say, well, I'm not going to bring it up. They might not be thinking of it. Trust me, if you're thinking it, they're thinking it. So I love that one. You also hear from a communication standpoint, you want to run to danger. So why not run to the objection? Because if it's going to be an issue, you and I were talking on another thread, on another LinkedIn thread. If it's a no, if it's an NO, I want a KNOW as quickly as possible. So yeah, I like that idea. Now, what would that look like in practical sense? How would we run towards an objection?
Well, I think, and we talked about this a little bit on the podcast, but I think that we can set up our meeting in the very beginning in the agenda, kind of like an upfront contract, to share at hello that this is a space where we welcome and want to know about questions, concerns, and objections. So I share this on LinkedIn too, but I typically like to say, you know, I'm a super straight shooter. So if at any moment this feels not interesting, like the worst thing ever, or anything in between, you know, do I have your word you'll be straight with me?
Yeah.
So basically, you know, couching the entire conversation in the fact that this is a place where if there's something that's not working for you, I want to know.
Yeah. So that like Todd's book, The Transparency Sale, we want to run to that transparency, have a business conversation couched in transparency. So yeah, okay, good. So mindset, you want to run towards it. What else on that before we get out? What else you had on mindset?
Well, so, I also think that oftentimes, and this is more like relational, but I often think that sellers think of objections as a place where the relationship risks falling apart.
Okay.
Now, it does risk falling apart if you handle it poorly, but I actually think through handling conflict or objections or disagreement well, the relationship and the sense of trust and safety that goes along with that relationship can actually grow stronger. So I see objections as an opportunity to deepen relationship rather than as inevitably kind of blowing the whole thing up.
Yeah, and I took that off of, what's your mindset whenever you're going into it? Do you take it a mindset of, well, that's curious, I wasn't expecting you to throw out that objection, or my belief is this is the best thing going for you. This would be a great solution. So I'm curious, why do you not believe the same? So we could take one of curiosity. We could take one of friendship, where we look to both win-win and better uncover it. I also marked down that we could put this as a foe, like it's a win-lose or a win at any cost kind of thing. So there's a couple of different mindsets that we could take. And I think that one of the key things to do, if we're going to look at this, is take a mindset of skeptical curiosity, right? I know why it would work out for me, but I'm skeptical of why it would work out for you. So that skeptical curiosity couched with first seeking to understand, well, help me understand your point of view. So I think if we can do that, and a couple of resources come to mind, radical candor comes to mind, where, you want to couch towards challenge, but a relationship. So some people call it carefrontational. Kim Scott calls it radical candor in her book. So those are all things that came to mind to bring up with that mindset that you just mentioned. So what else? How else did you view this from a mindset of that transparency and really uncovering that?
Well, I think that, so along with this idea that objections are an opportunity to deepen relationship, not blow it up, although if you handle it poorly, it can blow it up. It's like, what does this person, and you know how interested I am in like bringing what humans fundamentally need in relationship into the selling conversation, but it's like when someone raises a concern, they're probably kind of armoring up and prepared to go to battle as well. But how we basically appreciate and essentially welcome that objection, there's a real opportunity in doing that first to kind of diffuse and disarm the kind of tension and confrontation that they were expecting. So like even this week, I was in a conversation with a prospect who was interested in training, and he raised an objection around pricing. And the very first thing I said to him was, I am so grateful, so appreciative that you were straight with me. When I decided to go into business for myself, I told myself that I would be doing business completely transparently, and I really want the same for for folks that I'm working with. So rather than, getting my kind of the hairs going up on my back and starting to get in this defensive posture, I thanked him. And I think that is a kind of vital step in really handling any objection. I mean, what do you think, Brian?
It's curious. So if you welcome that, so if we run to the objection, meaning that we're going to be completely transparent, we welcome them, and then we reward them whenever they bring up an objection, right? Yes. So we absolutely, the first time they're not going to expect it. If you say, hey, let me know what you don't like about this, or, let's be transparent, and they're transparent with you, and then you attack them and turn into regular salesperson, now you've just ruined trust and any relationship that you had built up to that point. So that's a really good idea, is reward the behaviors so they continue on with it.
Yeah, because like I said, just because an objection isn't voiced doesn't mean it isn't there. And it's our job to bring them out into the light, because if we don't know what they are, there's no way that we can ever handle or overcome them. I mean,
yeah, go ahead. You know your question.
Well, I was just going to say, Brian, like when you think about it, what is typically your first step when you receive an objection?
I cry a little bit.
You-
So here's some thoughts that I have. So on the emotion side, we have to think about what your emotion is going in and what their emotion is going in.
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter what you feel. We have to be intentional from a selling perspective. We're the ones that own the relationship. We're the one that owns the results. It's up to us in order to create that environment where transparent communication can happen. So if we come at this with anger or frustration, or that, I'm going to jam this down so you get this, so I get my boss off my back so I can sell this, that's not going to help anyone, right? So we have to look at our emotions and theirs. And I thought about some of the types of emotions that would really get into objection handling. One is disappointed. I was so looking forward to this, hearing more about the solution. It's not anything that I was hoping for. Well, now we need a candor statement. So that candor statement would be, well, I'm disappointed too. We meet them where they're at, that empathy piece, but it's actually not even a candor statement, it's a candor question. So help me understand, what all are we missing, right? Or, shoot, I really would have liked to have this happen or work for you. And I'm disappointed that I'm letting you down here. I'd love to be the solution, but if we're not, it's important that we discuss that. So can you help me understand what are maybe some of the key pieces that are missing here? And listen, if I can't do that, or my hope is I've just misrepresented. But worst case, if we can't do those things, I'd rather let you know now. If I'm going to get fired, I'd rather get fired before you hire me, right? So some type of a candor statement there whenever you're looking at disappointment, or scared, some type of a unity statement. You can see that they're nervous or uncomfortable. They're scared about what's going to happen. Maybe they're scared or nervous about the unknown. Put down some type of a unity statement. Go ahead.
I just want to pause here because this is so interesting. So it sounds to me, and I've never really thought about it this way, Brian, like you're thinking about objection handling involving reading the emotional state of the prospect, if it's fear or disappointment or sadness, and then meeting them and attending to those emotional needs differently based on what you're getting from them.
Yeah, there's no cookie cutter approach.
No.
Oh, thank you.
Oh, friggin' cool. So keep going. So you were saying about the unity statement.
Yeah. So if I'm scared or nervous, which a lot of people are, right? Because when we're asking somebody to buy, what we're really asking them to do is change behavior.
Yes.
Because we're asking them to change status quo, and change scares most people. So a lot of times they're going to be scared that they're going to make a mistake. They're scared about having to make a change. They're scared about the political ramification if this thing goes sideways. There's a lot of fear and trepidation in there. So whenever somebody's scared or they bring up an objection and we're sensing fear or timidness out of it, then it's some type of unity statement. Hey, listen, you're not alone. This is such a complex process. Would it maybe help to understand what the steps are in making this go forward? Let's really unpack this, make sure that we can get you comfortable with all that's going to happen. And you know what, Jordana, if you're not comfortable with it at the end of this, I've messed up, or this isn't a solution for you. Either way, we'll look to get that fixed. Something along those lines, right? But meet them where they're at. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say that's so powerful, Brian, for a number of reasons. One, this idea of reading the emotion and then tending to that emotion, whatever it is. And it might be a different approach for different emotions that you're reading in your objection handling. But I also love what you're doing here in that you're not making it seem like your goal is to overcome and move past their objection. The goal is to understand it, and you're giving them a way out and giving them that autonomy, like we talked about in the podcast, like that. And it's okay, if in the end, through discussing this, it still doesn't make sense, that's okay. And I think that that's so powerful because a lot of times it can be kind of scary, as you say, to even raise an objection. There's like there's the fear of change, and then there's the fear of raising the objection, because the tendency is going to be that, like I said, the buyer and seller are going to go to battle, or the seller is going to try to manipulate them or invalidate their concerns to get them to the close. But I think by way of saying, let's talk about this, and if it still doesn't, if it doesn't make sense, or if you don't feel good in the end, that's okay, is really powerful.
Yeah, because if you think about it,
Yeah.
people buy emotionally, they justify intellectually.
Right.
And these objections or questions are couched from an emotional, emotional state of, I don't know what's exactly going on here. And
Yes.
so we have to meet them where they're at from a communications, like human psychology standpoint, to be able to uncover the problem. Because too often we just skip right over it and we just keep moving on, and that underlying root cause is never addressed. So we're band-aids and twine as opposed to root cause solution. And that's why I think so many implementations fail, because we're just slapping on band-aids and duct tape rather than real root cause solutions.
Right. I mean, it's just so interesting, because I would say that maybe, I mean, this is not scientific, but maybe 3% of sellers are approaching it in the way that you are, like really reading the emotional root behind the objection and then tending to that emotion first.
Yeah, and that goes back to the mindset. What's the mindset that you have going in? My mindset is, our belief in our company, the reason that we founded our company is because we aim to help communities thrive through entrepreneurship. So my key aim is to help entrepreneurs to thrive, to give back to community, to help communities foster and
Right.
thrive and flourish. So if I go in with a win-lose or win at all cost mentality in any of my approaches, whether it's hiring people, managing people, leading people, the way I sell, the way I deliver, it's not going to come off right. So, and the curious thing is, this isn't just about sales. This is all human interpersonal skills. How are we treating our spouse? How are we treating our loved ones? How are we treating our children? Right. So all of this is really the same. So it's less about sales and more about, how do I just talk to other humans and make sure that we understand one another?
Yeah.
So yeah, so I had that scared. So we look for some type of unity statement so they don't feel isolated or alone. And then if they're angry, a de-escalation statement.
Hmm.
If they're angry, well, my gosh, I must have really stepped in it. Can we back up a little bit? Help me understand, what did I say or do that made you angry here, so I can take ownership of it and rightfully apologize.
Beautiful.
Right,
Beautiful.
run, like you said, runs towards the challenge. And then lastly, that mistrust has to be some type of candor statement. And that candor statement or transparency statement, it seems like I've missed the mark here.
Hmm.
And maybe I'm reminding you of a past experience that you had that didn't go well, or said something inadvertently. But I get the sense that we don't have that real level of trust that's needed to dive down deeply to solve this issue. So can we talk about that and just hit that right there? Because it's not price, it's not this, it's not the presenting cost that they gave you. It's some type of an emotional issue that they're dealing with that we need to unpack.
Right. Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I think that the biggest mistake that sellers make, I mean, separate from this whole emotional piece, which is really rocking my world, I'm learning a lot actually from you here, Brian, but is that sellers will hear a quote unquote objection, and then they'll immediately jump to a response without curiosity, certainly without any of this kind of emotional reading. And then 9 times out of 10, they're responding to completely the wrong true objection. But because of their lack of curiosity and their decision to respond rather than ask questions, the chances of hitting the mark in a way that really resonates to move through the objection in a way that feels good is almost none. So I was just going to say, there's this emotional piece, and then super tactically, what I like that you're doing is that you are incorporating this emotional attendance with deeper curiosity to figure out what is really going on.
Yeah, and to piggyback from that, we have to stay unattached, both from a buying side and a selling side. We have to be almost a third party observant
Right.
of what's going on. Because if we get emotionally attached, I don't know if you're like this, I might be the only one, but you're sitting there, instead of listening, you're thinking about, how am I going to overcome this? Oh my gosh, how is this going to impact me? This is what I'm going to say back. And we're not listening whatsoever to what they're saying. And they're giving us all the insights that we need in order to solve this situation.
Right.
And I'm telling you, I'm guilty, because I get emotionally involved and then I stop listening and I start having a conversation in my head, right?
Right. Well, I think too, what's interesting is that even, let's say you have the perfect quote unquote response, and that response somehow, without any questions from you, resonates directly with their concern. If they're not feeling safe and heard and received, they're not going to be primed to absorb what you're telling them. So I think that's one of the reasons, be it through appreciation and empathy, or through specifically attending to some of these feelings that you're picking up, you've got to start there in order to increase the likelihood of them even being open to anything you have to say.
Precisely. And that openness is the key foundation for trust and transparency. Well said.
100%.
All right. So I think we beat up emotions pretty decently. Let's skip over to tactics. That's probably what most people want. So, a lot of this they might think is foo-foo and fluffy. I challenge you on this. You're going to have to practice extreme control, self-discipline. I call it meekness, right? Power under control, in order to do this, because what we'd rather do is battle back and win at all costs. That's my natural tendency. So everything here is learned, because I'd rather just come right at you. So taking those as a backdrop, let's talk about some of the tactics. What are maybe some tactics that came to mind on these?
Well, I mean, so there's receive and empathize, and then attend to these emotions. And then it's get curious. You've got to ask questions, because what's so interesting is, like, someone might say, well, I'm not interested, or now isn't a good time. And if you dig one or two questions in, you might discover completely different root causes for now not being a good time. One could be uncertainty around COVID. And you only know that by saying, tell me more, thank you for telling me that, I know how important timing is. Tell me more about, what you mean by it not being a good time, right? And that can net you, it's COVID. That could net you, we've just hired a new manager. We're not sure if we're ready to make changes right when we've hired this person. And learning more about what each of those circumstances mean to the business is going to increase the likelihood of your being able to talk it through with them in a way that's going to resonate. So question asking, I guess, tactically is what I'm saying.
I'd agree with that. So I've marked meet them where they're at, right? We have to find out where they are presently. So that, I think you couch that as receive the message.
Yep.
And then the second thing is I call it an empathy statement.
Yeah.
Some type of de-escalation, whether it's that unity statement, candor statement, de-escalation, right? Whatever statement we want to do, but it's an empathy statement to get them talking. And then do some type of a clarity question, because you noticed all my statements, my empathy statements were followed by a question, because we don't truly know what's going on there. So it gets into active listening to frame back to them what they said, or paraphrase. If you're talking Chris Voss language, he talks about label it or mirror it, right? So whatever term you want to use, it's active listening, right? So do some active listening, and then do your questioning strategies, which is asking, using an empathy statement and asking questions, and then respond back with those candor statements. If this is true, because of that, boom. Right. And I always use not always, but I typically do a candor statement in a tactic I call right or win. I either want to be right or I want to win.
What's an example of a candor statement?
So a candor statement would be, so throw out an objection. Let's try this real time and I'll embarrass myself.
Okay. Yeah, I like everything you're saying, but now this isn't a good time.
Got it. Okay. So knowing full well, we only have so much bandwidth. I get it completely. So help me understand some of the things that are going on right now. That's going to be my clarifying question.
Beautiful.
And you say blah, 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 right?
Yep.
Okay. So blah, 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 blah. Got it. Okay. Well, so it seems like even if we're free, even if this was the best thing under the sun, and you believe that, you believe that it fixed everything that we just talked about, which was blank, 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 blank. My sense is, even if all of that were true, timing still isn't right.
Oh, that's interesting. So I might say, well, I think if it were a little less expensive, we could probably make it work.
And that's why I go to the negative, right? I want to be right or I want to win. Because if I lay it out, what my solution would be couched in all of those terms, and I say, even if all of that were true, I lay out the ideal statement, the picture that I want them to see, timing still wouldn't be right.
That is so brilliant, Brian, because I think that is a far more sophisticated way of isolating the concern than saying, is there anything else or what else? I'll often advise folks, rather than just, getting the objection and then responding to it. I like for folks to say, well, talk to me about what else is holding you back, which I think is good, and it moves towards the objection. But I think this is a really interesting approach, because then it gets them to volunteer. Well, actually, if it were less expensive, and then you realize, oh, maybe this is about price, not timing.
Correct. Because if you lay it out there, throwing out all of the answers to the objection, even if it were free, that would take away price. Even if you believed, because it's never price, it's a belief issue. If you truly believe that there's going to be the return on investment of time and capital, right, political capital, all of those investments, if you truly believe that it was going to be worthwhile, you would likely do it. And so we want to lay out there a lot of those objections. Even if it was the price that you wanted, you believed it was a value, wouldn't suck all your time. You were wholly expecting and believed that this would, go back to the pain that you discovered or we talked about, that were impact. Even if you believed all that were true, my sense is, or it seems like, no matter what, timing's just off.
And so what are you hoping there that they say?
The truth. So that's why it's called the right or win strategy. Yes, you're right. Shoot, I did not want to be right. Or they say, well, I wouldn't say that. Sweet, I win. So what would you say?
Right.
And now I'm back into the conversation. But by framing it towards the negative, it allows it's less pressure. It's taking away all pressure, right? If I say, hey, would you want to do this? I don't know. I say, hey, you probably wouldn't want to do this. Well, actually, I would. Or no, you're right, I wouldn't. So it's that subtle little nuance.
And so if they say that's right, even if it were free, it's not a good time, then the timing is really poor, and then you start to ask them about when would be a better time and what would need to happen in order for it to be a good time, right?
Precisely. Then the legit issue is really time. And then we can unpack the root cause. All right, well, let's talk through some of the time. What's taking your time, and let's walk through what would have to change in order. Because what you might find is some of the things sucking their time, they didn't realize your solution is going to help them with time.
Right. So that, I think, is a really interesting, kind of goes back to mindset shift for sellers. In some ways, like you are detectives, you are sleuths. Like your objective in objection handling is not to overcome, it is to get to the truth. That's your first objective. Absolutely. Yeah.
And the truth will set you free. That's exactly it.
Right on. Yeah.
Because if you don't know what the truth is, if you don't know what the real objection is, you're not going to solve for it. And that's why people are cutting prices. They're doing this and that and everything else. In reality, I don't care what you do, they're not doing it.
No, that's right.
And so that idea of that candor statement couched in that tactic of I want to be right or I want to win, is a really effective way of doing that. Now, you have to be careful, though, caveat. You can become a real jerk whenever you're using that right or win tactic and come off condescending and arrogant. So be very cautious whenever you're doing that. Make sure your tonality is right.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. So other tactics. So we talked about your couple of steps, which were again?
Well, so it's appreciate and empathize. And I don't have an acronym for this yet. It's get curious, right? Dig in through questions to really get to the root of the objection, the true objection. Then it's around isolating, getting a sense of, and really proactively moving towards other objections. So rather than being like, whew, got that one, let me respond. It's, so what else? What else would prevent you from moving forward? Or what else, you know, makes this feel like this isn't a fit for you?
Yeah.
And then from there, you know, once you've isolated and get to the real truth objection, that and only then is really when you can quote unquote respond, you know.
Yep. What else did you have? And I'll throw out one last thought I had on tactics,
Yeah.
and then we'll hit the practice.
Okay. So what else did I have on tactics?
Yep. If anything, I don't want to put you on the spot.
Yeah, no, I think that's primarily the flow. It's about really waiting till you have all of the information that you need and have done the emotional work of making them feel safe and heard and received before you respond. I think that's really the crux of it.
You're a nice lead-in. So that leads me into my last tactic, which is a couple of them, which is the tactic of communication. So whenever you're thinking about communication, to be able to pull all of these off, you have to think the communication of voice. What's your tone? What's your pace? What's your pitch? What's your inflection? Those are all critical. So acting class, improv, acting class, improv, stand-ups, whatever the case may be, learn how to use your voice as the tool that it is. So getting that voice down. Other pieces is more human psychology, DISC profiling, right? So DISC or some of these other personality type, so you can understand their communication style, the psychology of okay, not okay, transactional analysis, Cartman's triangle, the games we play. So knowing all of those things, so you understand what the prospect is knowingly or unknowingly doing in this whole entire process. And then lastly, the communication wheel. How much is verbal? How much is tonality? How much is body language? And being able to, even over a video, being able to pick up those micro expressions on the face, knowing all of those things are critically important to be able to pull off the emotional side, to ask the right questions in the right way, where we're seeking first to serve them, to find out if we can help them. And if we can't help them, then it's incumbent upon us to get them to realize that we are their best solution. So that's kind of the overarching idea of communication. A lot in there, but it takes a while to get all of those things.
Well, I was going to say too, I think all of those are really important, unless anybody watching or listening thinks, oh my God, I have to know all of those things in order to handle objections well. I think you really hit on it, is that if our intention is to serve, to empathize, to help, and to understand, that is going to come through, I think, authentically, you know, in our tonality, right? And in the way that we inquire and dig deeper with these objections. I think if our intention is to win, to battle, to be right at the expense of their wrongness, that's going to come across too. So I think this idea of mindset in some ways might be the most important piece of all of this, followed by this idea that the response, it can't come right away. There's a lot of things we need to do in between before we're ready to quote unquote respond.
There you go. All right. So I think that we beat this topic up. So I guess anything on practice?
Well, it's funny. I was actually wondering about, like, so, you know, as related to this whole thing about being able to identify feelings, it'd be so interesting, I think, for sellers to listen back to some of their recorded calls where prospects are objecting and call out either to themselves in their phone, in their heads, you know, what the underlying emotions are, and get used labeling them, and not necessarily labeling them out loud in an objecting moment with a prospect. Because I think if you say to a prospect who's angry, wow, you seem angry, that could actually
Yeah, right.
Right. But that it's really about developing, kind of attuning your ear and your psyche, I guess, to what other people are feeling. And I think that could be a really interesting thing to practice.
Yeah, and so with that, whenever you're looking at practicing, practice the different types of objections, right? Are they truly an objection, or is it a comment? Because you're going to handle an objection couched as a question differently, right? If they just say this is too high, that's not a question or a statement, so I don't know what to do with that. So you're going to handle that differently with different than hey, can you take down your price?
Right.
But there's two different things. Go ahead.
You know, I was just going to say, the only other thing I'll say is that we often treat objections in some ways as these isolated things that come up in conversation, and sellers are looking for like the silver bullet steps they need to walk through, or the the one response that is going to bust through objections. But I think we also have to remember that objections typically come up because needs were not sufficiently met earlier on in the conversation. So probably the most important thing to cut objections off at the pass is to make sure that you do really great discovery. And then when it comes time to presenting your solution, that you're doing it in a way that feels really tailored and meets their specific needs. Because in absence of that, you are going to be confronting a world of objections.
Yeah, and make sure that the communication is where they understand it, because too oftentimes we believe that we conveyed a message and they didn't convey that message that we thought we conveyed. So that understanding, oftentimes missed expectations or misunderstood delivery of how of message is what causes the objection. So really understanding that. So different types, when they come, what are their frequency asked questions, most common objections that you get, and then make sure that you role play them out. Put those playbooks together, rehearse with your team, throw them out there, make sure that you get it, because there's probably 9. I mean, there's really 9 objections that typically come up. You only get so many questions. So go ahead. Sorry.
No, I was just gonna say, and I know we have to wrap up, but I saw something. There was an interview that Jason Bay from Blissful Prospecting did with a sales leader who talks about the difference between role play and simulations. And in role play, he said, that typically people who are role playing the prospect don't do a very good job at actually embodying the true concerns that prospects have. But if you do a simulation where you essentially assign the people who are playing the prospect a persona with a set of intentions and a set of needs, then they can go into that role play. It becomes essentially a simulation, which is truer to real life as a prospect. I'm not explaining this very well, but do you understand what I'm saying? Like, if you're just off the cuff role playing, it can be very hard to authentically embody the real concerns of a prospect. If you're given circumstances, you can do it much better. So that's the difference between simulation and role play.
Yeah, I like the idea of simulation, especially since we, hearkening back to the very beginning of this, we're talking about simulations whenever you're airplane or driving or whatever the case may be. So if you harken back to that simulation, and I'd also say for those that are simulating, role playing, whatever you want to call it, don't always give in. Don't always give the meeting. Don't always give the sale. The more you challenge the person, the better they're going to be able to handle those in real life. So don't always let them win, because that's real world. We're going to lose 77% of the time usually. So great. Well, Jordana, this was a lot of fun.
So fun to talk with you.
Yeah. Any parting thoughts before we take off?
I want to do a Nick Capozzi rapport battle next.
Yes. All right. So Nick Capozzi, we're going to challenge you to a rapport battle. Anyone listening to this, what topics do you want to hit? Who do you want to hear from? I think that we banter back and forth, and then out of this, Jordana is going to come up with some new tactics to put in her training things. I'll use some of my own, and you as the audience, hopefully you got some good takeaways, and reach out to Jordana or me or whomever, and let's do a better job out there. The more professional we are in what we do, the easier the life is going to be for all of us. So let's get rid of the really bad salespeople making our lives miserable.